Miriam Watson sat silently by her window, her sharp gaze locked onto the dimly lit street outside. At 72, the widow was a fixture of the neighborhood, known for her uncanny ability to notice things others missed. And lately, there was plenty to notice. Something that didn't sit right. Every night, like clockwork, a sleek black car would glide down Maple Street. The car's driver, James Harow, was a man with a reputation, once a pillar of success, a wealthy businessman known for his charity. But James wasn't the same anymore. His once pristine image was now shadowed by a cloud of secrecy. Beside him sat a young girl, Amara, her bright yellow dress and solemn eyes a jarring contrast to the man's tense demeanor. Their destination was always the same, a run-down, abandoned garage at the end of the street. Miriam's curiosity had turned into concern, and concern had blossomed into something deeper, a gnawing suspicion. Why was a man of wealth hiding out in such a decrepit place? And why did he bring a child with him night after night? Something's wrong, Miriam muttered to herself one evening as she watched them disappear into the garage again. The rhythmic creak of the door shutting behind them sent shivers down her spine. The neighborhood had always been quiet, safe. But James's nightly visits disrupted that peace, raising questions that no one else seemed brave enough to ask. What was happening in that garage? Why did James's face seem heavier each time she caught a glimpse of it? And why did Amara, a girl so young, carry an expression that seemed to hide more pain than joy? Miriam was determined to uncover the truth. This wasn't just curiosity. It was a mission. Miriam Watson's days had started blending into one another, but her nights were different now. They were filled with her silent vigil by the window, her knitting needles forgotten in her lap. Every evening, as the black car rolled down the street, she leaned forward, her breath held, waiting to see what she had seen every night before. "Always at the same time," she whispered one night, her voice carrying a mix of fascination and fear. "What are you hiding, James Harow?" The man's visits weren't just peculiar, they were methodical. James never interacted with anyone in the neighborhood, never looked twice at the passers-by. His face, once known for its easy smile, was now a mask of tension. Amara, the young girl who accompanied him, appeared similarly detached, though her wide, questioning eyes often glanced around as if searching for something, or someone. Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She remembered James from years ago, a man who had donated generously to community events and had been admired for his success. Seeing him reduced to this mysterious, secretive existence felt like witnessing a tragedy unfold in slow motion. "I don't care what anyone says," Miriam muttered after overhearing her neighbors dismiss her concerns. "I'm not imagining this." One day, she decided to act. Under the guise of watering her plants, she positioned herself closer to the garage, hoping to catch any detail that might explain the nightly routine. As James guided Amara into the shadowy building, Miriam caught sight of something that made her heart skip a beat. James's sharp blue suit, once immaculate, now looked rumpled and worn. And Amara's yellow dress, once bright, seemed faded, its edges fraying. "They're not just hiding," she realized. "They're struggling." Her curiosity deepened, but so did her worry. The secrecy surrounding the pair hinted at something larger, something dangerous. It wasn't just about appearances anymore. The tension in James's shoulders, the way he glanced over his shoulder as if expecting danger, and the somber silence that enveloped Amara all pointed to a story far more complex than a man in hiding. Miriam began to notice the subtle details she had previously missed. James always parked his car in the exact same position, close enough to the garage to shield Amara from prying eyes. The two would spend hours inside before leaving at dawn. And yet, no one else in the neighborhood seemed to care. "They've got their own lives to live," Tom, her neighbor, had said when she brought up her concerns. "Leave the man alone, Miriam. Rich folks are just eccentric." But Miriam couldn't leave it alone. As the nights passed, her unease grew. She replayed every detail she had observed in her mind, each new piece adding to the puzzle she couldn't yet solve. And then one night, something happened that shattered her growing sense of routine. A second car, a sleek, unfamiliar vehicle, pulled up to the garage. Miriam leaned forward, her breath catching as she watched a sharply dressed man step out and approach James. Their conversation, though muffled by the distance, was clearly heated. James's usual calm demeanor faltered as he gestured pleadingly. The man jabbed a finger in James's direction, his voice sharp even though Miriam couldn't make out the words. James hung his head, defeated, before the man turned and stormed back to his car. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped off, leaving James standing alone in the driveway, his shoulders slumped like a man carrying the weight of the world. Miriam's pulse quickened. Something wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. Whatever was happening in that garage wasn't simply a matter of pride or secrecy. It was something bigger, something darker. She didn't know what yet, but Miriam Watson had made up her mind. She was going to find out, no matter the cost. The morning after the mysterious visitor's appearance, Miriam walked to the community center. She needed to share her concerns, to see if anyone else had noticed the peculiarities surrounding James Harow and the little girl. Sitting among her usual group at the book club, Miriam hesitated before speaking. Debbie, her longtime friend, leaned in. "Miriam, you've been quiet lately. Something on your mind?" Miriam placed her cup of tea down deliberately. "It's about James Harow," she began. "Have any of you noticed the strange things happening with him?" Tom, the retired postal worker, chuckled. "Strange things? Miriam, he's just another eccentric rich guy. What's so strange about that?" "It's not just him," Miriam pressed. "It's the girl, Amara. They're living in that garage at the end of Maple Street. Every night they disappear inside. They don't come out until morning. Doesn't that seem wrong?" Lisa, the young mother of two, furrowed her brow. "Are you sure? James has always been generous to the community. Maybe he's just helping her family somehow." Miriam shook her head, her voice firm. "No, Lisa. I've been watching them for weeks. There's no family. It's just the two of them, night after night. Something isn't right." Tom leaned back, his tone more serious. "And what exactly do you think is going on, Miriam? You think he's done something wrong?" "I don't know," Miriam admitted, frustration seeping into her words. "But there's secrecy, tension, and that visitor last night. He was angry, shouting. James looked terrified. If there's even the slightest chance that girl's in danger, shouldn't we do something?" Debbie sighed, reaching out to pat Miriam's hand. "You've always had a good heart, Miriam. But maybe you're overthinking this. James has always been a good man. People change, but that doesn't mean he's done anything bad." "Change isn't always innocent," Miriam countered, her voice rising slightly. "And Amara, her eyes. They're not the eyes of a child who feels safe." Lisa looked away, uncomfortable. Tom muttered something under his breath. Debbie gave Miriam a sympathetic smile. "Just be careful, dear. It's easy to see ghosts where there are none." Miriam left the community center more frustrated than when she'd arrived. They didn't understand, or worse, they didn't want to. But Miriam was certain. Whatever James was hiding, it was something dark. And she couldn't look away. That evening, Miriam sat by her window again, watching as James's car rolled down Maple Street. Her heart raced. Tonight, she decided, she would do more than watch. She would follow. Pulling on her coat and sturdy shoes, Miriam waited until the garage door creaked shut behind James and Amara before slipping out into the night. The streetlights cast long shadows as she moved cautiously down the sidewalk, her footsteps silent. From the safety of a nearby tree, Miriam watched the garage. Hours passed, and the cold night air bit at her skin, but she didn't waver. Then, just before midnight, the garage door opened. James and Amara emerged, their movements hurried. Amara clung to James's hand as they approached the car. Miriam held her breath, waiting until the vehicle started moving before stepping into the street and following at a safe distance. The black car wound its way through the quiet streets, eventually stopping at the entrance of a park. Miriam parked a short distance away, her pulse quickening as she watched James and Amara walk to a bench under a dim street lamp. Creeping closer, she hid behind a tree, straining to hear their conversation. "I don't want to leave," Amara's small voice carried on the breeze, her words tinged with sadness. "This is our home now." James crouched in front of her, his voice low but urgent. "It's not safe anymore, Amara. They know where we are. We have to go." "But why can't we stay?" she insisted, tears glistening in her eyes. James sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her question. "Because I can't protect you here. Not anymore." Miriam's heart clenched. Protect her? From what? Lost in thought, she didn't notice the twig beneath her foot until it snapped. The sound echoed in the quiet park. James's head whipped around. His eyes scanned the shadows, his body tense. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Miriam pressed herself against the tree, hardly daring to breathe. For a long moment, James stared in her direction, his eyes narrowing. "Amara," he said finally, grabbing her hand. "We need to leave, now." Miriam watched helplessly as James hurried Amara back to the car, their movements urgent, almost panicked. The vehicle sped off into the night, leaving Miriam alone in the cold, her mind racing. Back home, she sat by her window, staring at the garage. The conversation she'd overheard played on repeat in her head. What wasn't safe? Who was after them? And why was James running? One thing was clear. Miriam couldn't ignore this any longer. She was going to uncover the truth, even if it meant putting herself in danger. The following evening, Miriam was at her post by the window, her heart pounding with anticipation. The night had taken on a tense quietness, the kind that made even the faintest sound seem amplified. James's car arrived as usual, the headlights sweeping briefly over the street before the garage door creaked open. But just as James and Amara disappeared inside, something different happened. A second car appeared. This one was sleek and unfamiliar, its dark body blending into the night. It rolled to a stop in front of the garage, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's door opened. Miriam's breath hitched as a tall man stepped out, his sharp suit radiating power and menace. His every movement spoke of control. "What is this?" Miriam whispered, leaning closer to the glass. The garage door opened slightly, and James emerged. Miriam could see the tension in his posture even from a distance. He wasn't the confident man she remembered from years ago. He looked defeated. The two men exchanged words, their voices too low for Miriam to hear, but their gestures spoke volumes. The visitor pointed accusingly at James, his voice sharp and commanding. James raised his hands defensively, his head bowing as if in apology. Then the visitor stepped closer, his finger jabbing into James's chest. The gesture was aggressive, a clear threat. James flinched but said nothing. Finally, the visitor turned sharply and stormed back to his car, slamming the door behind him. The engine roared to life and the car sped away, leaving James standing alone under the faint glow of the streetlight. Miriam's hands trembled as she clutched the curtain. The scene replayed in her mind, the threat, James's helplessness, and the visitor's overwhelming presence. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than she'd imagined. She stared at the garage long after James went back inside. "You're in trouble, James," she murmured, "and I'm not going to let you face it alone." The next morning, Miriam decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. She marched to the garage, her steps steady but her heart racing. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew she needed answers. As she reached the garage, she raised her hand and knocked firmly on the door. For a moment there was silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing James. "Miriam?" he asked, his voice laced with surprise and suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto his. "About last night. About everything." James hesitated, glancing over his shoulder into the dark interior of the garage. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." The air inside was damp and cold. Amara sat in the corner, her yellow dress now visibly frayed, hugging a small stuffed bear. She looked up at Miriam with wide, wary eyes. Miriam's heart softened, but she turned back to James. "I've been watching you, James," she began. I know something isn't right. That man who came last night, who was he? What does he want?" James sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "It's not safe." "Safe from what?" Miriam demanded. "James, if you're in danger, let me help. And Amara, she's just a child. She doesn't deserve this." James's expression hardened. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low. "This isn't something you can fix." "Then help me understand," Miriam snapped, her voice trembling with frustration. "Because right now, all I see is a scared man and a little girl hiding from something or someone. You're not alone, James. Let me in." For a long moment, James said nothing. Then he sank onto a nearby stool, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I lost everything," he admitted quietly. "The business, the money, the house. It's all gone. And the man you saw last night? He's one of the people I owe. They've been chasing me for months." Miriam's breath caught. "And Amara?" James's face softened as he glanced at the little girl. "She's my niece," he said. "Her parents, they're gone. I'm all she has left. But now, because of me, she's caught up in this mess." Miriam felt a wave of compassion wash over her. "James," she said gently, "you don't have to do this alone. Let me help you. We can find a way out of this." James shook his head. "You don't understand. These people don't just go away. And if they find out you're involved—" "I'm not afraid," Miriam said firmly. "But I am afraid for Amara. Whatever it takes, James, we'll figure this out together." For the first time in months, James looked at her with something like hope. "You'd do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miriam nodded. "Sometimes," she said softly. "We have to rely on others to help us stand again. Let me be that for you, for Amara." James hesitated, then finally nodded. "Okay," he said. "But we need to move carefully. They're watching." Miriam straightened, determination lighting her eyes. "We'll make a plan. But first, you and Amara are coming with me. You can't stay here." As they packed what little they had, Miriam felt a sense of resolve she hadn't experienced in years. James and Amara needed her, and she wasn't going to let them down. The first step was safety. The next would be rebuilding. And together they would find a way to escape the shadows that had haunted them for so long. Miriam's small house had always been quiet, a place of solitude after her husband passed. But that night, it became a haven. James and Amara stepped through the front door, their expressions a mix of relief and hesitation. "Amara," Miriam said gently, kneeling to meet the little girl's gaze, "this is your home now, for as long as you need it. You're safe here." Amara looked up at James, seeking reassurance. He nodded, and the little girl managed a small, tentative smile. "Thank you," James said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "We'll worry about that later," Miriam replied briskly. "Right now, we need a plan. Those men won't stop looking for you, will they?" James shook his head. "Number, they're ruthless. They'll come here if they think I'm hiding." "Then we need to make sure they don't," Miriam said firmly. She motioned toward the kitchen. "Let's talk while Amara settles in." As Amara explored the small bedroom Miriam had prepared, James and Miriam sat at the table. The weight of the situation hung heavy between them. "What exactly do they want?" Miriam asked. "Money," James said bitterly. "A lot of it. More than I'll ever have. When my business failed, I made bad deals, loans I couldn't repay. I thought I could fix things before they got out of hand, but—" He trailed off, his eyes clouded with regret. "And Amara?" Miriam pressed. James sighed. "After her parents died, I promised I'd take care of her. But I've done nothing but drag her into this mess." "You've kept her safe," Miriam said firmly. "That's no small feat." "Not for much longer," James admitted. "They've found us once. They'll do it again." Miriam tapped her fingers against the table, her mind racing. "Then we'll make it hard for them to track you. No more staying in one place too long. You'll use my address for now. I have an old contact. He might help you find work under the radar." James's eyes widened. "You'd do all that for us? You're not the only one who's lost someone," Miriam said softly. "Helping you, it gives me purpose. And Amara deserves better than living in fear." As the plan began to take shape, James's tension eased slightly. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. Before they retired for the night, Miriam peeked into the room where Amara had fallen asleep. The little girl clutched the worn, stuffed bear, her face peaceful for the first time since Miriam had seen her. Standing in the doorway, James whispered, "She's been through so much." Miriam placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "She's safe now, and so are you. Tomorrow, we start fresh." James nodded, a hint of gratitude shining in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, he believed that they might find a way forward. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. Miriam's quiet home began to hum with the subtle energy of life. Amara quickly found comfort in the small but cozy bedroom Miriam had prepared, its walls adorned with soft, calming colors. For James, however, the transition was less smooth. Every night, Miriam would find him sitting on the back porch, his head bowed, the weight of his past mistakes visibly pressing on him. She joined him one evening, handing him a steaming cup of tea. "You've been quiet," she said softly. James sighed, his fingers tightening around the mug. "I can't stop thinking about what I've done. How I let everything fall apart. How I failed Amara." Miriam placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You didn't fail her, James. She's safe, and that's because of you. Now it's time to focus on what's next." "Next?" James asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Rebuilding," Miriam said firmly. "You're not starting from nothing. You have Amara and you have me. Let's take it one step at a time." James took her advice to heart. With Miriam's help, he found a part-time job at a small accounting firm in a neighboring town. Modest work compared to his former executive position, but enough to get back on his feet. Though the job was humbling, James approached it with quiet determination, grateful for the opportunity. Amara, meanwhile, started attending the local school. At first, she was shy and reserved, but her natural curiosity soon helped her form connections. Miriam often smiled as Amara came home with stories of her new friends and small triumphs, like earning a gold star in math class or sharing her lunch with a classmate. One afternoon, Miriam noticed James standing in the kitchen, staring at the modest paycheck he'd just received. "It's not much," he said, his voice low, "but it's something." "It's not about the amount," Miriam replied, her tone encouraging. "It's about taking responsibility, and that, James, is worth more than any paycheck." Despite their progress, danger still loomed. One evening, as Miriam prepared dinner, the phone rang. She answered it, expecting a call from a neighbor, but instead, a harsh voice demanded to know where James Harow was. Miriam's pulse quickened. "I'm sorry. I don't know who you're talking about," she said calmly, her hand gripping the phone tightly. "Don't play games," the voice growled. "We know he's there." Without hesitation, Miriam hung up. She turned to find James standing in the doorway, his face pale. "They've found us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll handle this," Miriam said resolutely. "You're not alone in this fight." Later that night, James called an old acquaintance, a lawyer who had once helped him during his business days. Together they formulated a plan to negotiate with the creditors and set boundaries. With Miriam's support, James stood his ground for the first time in months. As the weeks turned into months, the storm that had once engulfed James and Amara began to settle. The creditors, now confronted with a repayment plan and legal boundaries, withdrew their immediate threats. James, though still burdened by debts, finally felt the weight beginning to lift. Miriam's house transformed into a home filled with warmth and laughter. Amara's giggles often echoed through the halls as she played, and James began to smile again, a genuine smile that hadn't been seen in years. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, James turned to Miriam. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for what you've done for us." Miriam shook her head. "You already have, James. Watching you rebuild, seeing Amara happy, that's all the repayment I need." Amara joined them, holding a picture she had drawn in school. "Look!" she exclaimed, showing them a crayon drawing of a house surrounded by flowers and 3 stick figures. "That's us," she explained, pointing to the figures. "You, me, and Aunt Miriam. We're a family now." Miriam's heart swelled as she hugged Amara. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "We're a family. What did you think of this heartfelt journey? If you were in Miriam's shoes, would you have acted as she did? Could you take the risk to uncover the truth and protect those in need? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you were touched by this story, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more stories that inspire and connect. And don't forget, your feedback is invaluable to us. What rating would you give this story? Leave a comment to let us know how we can improve. Thank you for being part of this journey. We hope this story brought you not only suspense and emotion, but also a sense of hope and compassion. Wishing you all a wonderful day filled with joy and kindness. See you in the next story.